begin.
Why didn't I jump before this? Okay. Hello, hello, how are you? I hope you're keeping well. I hope you're keeping safe. My name is Marion Obura and I'm the lead events consultant at Majestic Events Kenya. And I'd like to welcome you to our YouTube channel where we discuss all things that are relevant and related to events. Now, today I specifically want to welcome you to the What's Next series. Now, this month we had a leadership trainer and motivational speaker, Leonard Asher, remind us how important it is to have a meeting with ourselves and how important it is not to get attached to our careers, right? And then the following week we had Nyambura Chege, who shared with us the signs that we should look out for that would show us whether we are mentally healthy or not, right? And the reason why we believe this is important is because for us to get through this pandemic season, especially those of us in the events industry, we need to be mentally correct. Our minds need to be right in order for us to survive and to thrive through this season. Now, today we have an amazing topic, and we'll be talking about how to develop our emotional intelligence for purpose and growth. And to help us figure this topic out, I am so excited, I think you can hear it in my voice, is none other than Mucha Mlingo, who is one of the top EQ coaches in Africa. She is the founder and the lead change maker of PTS Africa. Welcome, Mucha. It's so good to have you.
Thank you so much.
I won't lie, so many people have been like, I have been waiting for this lady, I have been looking for her. And so just to have you, to me, this is a total blessing. So karibu sana.
Asante. I'm really honored to be here and I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have today.
Yeah, me too. So before I even go, like, why? Why did you, I don't know if I should ask why or what is.
Yes.
So what is emotional intelligence? Like, what is emotional intelligence?
So emotional intelligence is being able to pick up on your emotions and the emotions of others, to understand what those emotions mean, what they're telling you, and to then use that emotional insight to adjust your behavior accordingly.
Okay.
And the reality is that our emotions are actually a gift. They are something that was created to aid us so that we can live life more successfully. And yet, very many of us pay very little attention to our emotions. As a matter of fact, very many of us treat our emotions as though they are an enemy rather than the ally they are. But emotional intelligence is really just being able to pick up on your emotions, understand what that emotion is telling you, and use that emotional insight. You know, we like to refer to this as being smart with our feelings.
Okay, I like that, being smart with our feelings. And it's funny that you say that it's a gift, because a lot of us are told, stop being emotional, you know, like, relax, you know. Now, how on earth did you get into this field? Like, did you wake up or did you finish school, or did you just decide, you know, emotional intelligence, this is what I want to do? Like, how did you even get into such a field?
I wish I could say that it was due to some smartness on my part. I will be very honest with you. I think God had mercy on me, looked down on me and realized that I was never going to get it together. And so there were a series of nudges that kind of put me along the journey, right? And I always, when I'm asked how I got into EQ, my question is always, how long do I have to tell this story? Because mine is a story. My background as far as education is concerned is banking, financial services. So Once upon a time, I was a banker. I worked for financial services companies and a couple of banks. And along the journey, I found myself working in the training department of a financial services company. So there's an American financial services company called Edward Jones. And my last job in the UK before I moved to Kenya was in their training department. And even that, I'll be honest, was something that was divinely brought about. And the reason why I say that is I'd been working as a banker for a number of years. I was a financial advisor working with clients. And I wasn't happy. I really was not happy. And when I look back now, it's interesting you mentioned that you had a guest talking about mental well-being. When I look back now, I realized that I was actually on the path to depression. So I was really unhappy. I did not like my job. It didn't meet my emotional needs. And I remember one day just deciding to quit. So I was working in a bank. It was Lloyd's TSB at the time. Lloyd's and TSB have since split, but it was Lloyd's TSB. And I quit. And I remember my colleagues at the bank asking me, okay, so where are you going? What's your next job?
Like what's next?
And I told them I don't have another job. I can't do this. I cannot. This is not what I was meant to do. It really isn't. And I spent, I think, about 6 months temping, trying to figure out. And I mean, this is not me in my early 20s. This is me in my late 20s, having I don't know, is that a midlife crisis? Trying to figure out what am I supposed to do with my life?
Yeah.
And I got a call. I got a call from a recruitment agency. They'd seen my CV online and they thought I was an ideal person for a role. And this was a role at Edward Jones in their training department. And you know, it's funny how you can run away from yourself for so long. From childhood, I'd always been someone who loved teaching. In church, I taught like classes. I remember one time when I was in university, I even used to teach maths. Maths was my favorite subject.
No way.
Yes, our church had a what was called like a school, like a support school kind of thing.
Yes.
And I remember I used to teach maths. I love teaching, but somehow I, in my mind, looked at this gift and thought, I cannot be a teacher. I will kill those children. and I felt like teachers aren't paid enough money. And believe you me, teaching in the UK is not a joke, right? So I think I looked at teaching only as teaching children. And so I just shut the door on that idea. And so, this recruiter saw, I guess, that I had taught, on a casual, on a voluntary basis.
Okay.
And then noted my financial services background and thought I'd be a good fit. And I went for this interview. And I remember when I got the job and I started working within the first month, I remember telling my boss that I felt like I'd come alive. I realized that this ability to teach could be utilized with grown-ups.
Nice.
And it blew my mind. And I remember saying to my boss, how did it take me so long to figure this out? Like, seriously, that I could teach grown-ups and I would love doing it. And so that began my training career. So I started working at Edward Jones in 2006. Coincidentally, it's the same year I got married. And I loved my job. I loved what I did.
I can see it as you're talking about it.
I loved being in class and having those moments where you can see the light bulb going on because someone has got what it is that you're teaching them. And I guess what was great about coming to training after having worked in financial services was that I wasn't just training theoretical stuff. Mm-hmm. I was training based on my experience.
Nice.
There's a saying that those who can't teach. And I think that is so untrue. I think those who can teach because
better.
They're able to teach based on not just books they've pulled from a library or an article they've seen on the internet. And I realized that this was it. This is what I was born to do. I was born to teach, to facilitate learning. And in 2008, my husband got a job here in Kenya. And I remember when he was invited to interview for the role, we'd never been to Kenya. We knew, I think, one person who lived in Kenya.
Wow.
Yes. And but my husband and I have always been, adventurous people. And so when he got the job, we're like, yeah, why not? Let's give it a go. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
If we hate it,
come back.
Just move back, right?
Yeah.
So in 2008, my husband came ahead, and I followed him because I needed to stay back and wind down our stuff. I followed him in 2009. When I moved to Kenya, we were expecting our first son, so I was home, happy to be, home to figure out this Kenyan life.
Oh, wow.
And living in Kenya and, understanding. And I was happy to be back on the African continent. There's a part of me that just loves Africa. I'm originally from Zimbabwe.
Oh, nice.
And I just loved being in Kenya.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few years, I had my second son, then decided that I wanted to start thinking about what next for me as far as work is concerned. I'd left my role, and now I knew the kind of thing I wanted to do.
Correct.
So I just needed to find it. So I remember, reaching out, the little networks I had, going online, looking around. And, my goal was to look at a financial services company because that was my background, but look for a training role.
Default.
Yes. But one of the things I realized was that training, and, we're talking about a while ago, over 10 years ago, training was a really junior function. Training was not a strategic role. Mm-hmm. The roles I found were training officer, which I knew meant it's something where you're just doing what you're being told to do. You're not actually contributing to the decision-making process. And I knew that wasn't the kind of role I wanted.
That you wanted,
no.
yeah.
I believe with all of my heart that training and building the skills of people is really at the core of business. Your
Absolutely.
people as an organization are the greatest asset you have. Right?
Say that again.
Your people are the greatest. Yes, your people are the greatest asset that you have. And I did not want to be someone who was just checking boxes. So it was back to the drawing board. And okay, so what do I do? By this time, we had made some friends here, and a friend of mine asked me to do some work for their company. He worked for a fair, medium-sized organization, and he asked me to do some training for them. And I will never forget the day I got paid for that job. And it suddenly hit me, wait a minute, I could actually do this. I could actually run my own business. It had never occurred to me. It hadn't, honestly. When I look back at my going to school, starting work, I was always one of those shooting for the corner office. And
with the window and the scene.
Yes, of course. And when we left the UK, I was fast tracked to, leadership. That was my goal, right? To be someone who would grow in leadership in a role working for a large multinational firm. That was always the vision
dream
I had. Yeah, but I realized that, okay, I could do this differently. And that's really how my journey started. So I set up my company. We incorporated in 2010. So this is 2 years after I had moved to Kenya. And, to be fair, for the first, I would say 5 years of the company, it was a hobby. I had small kids. I was very much involved in them. At some point, I was homeschooling. So it was a hobby. I worked as and when, right? And then about 5 years in, I decided, okay, the kids are grown or growing. I feel like there's an opportunity here. So when we started, we were a sales training company because that's my background. And your question was why EQ?
Yeah, why EQ?
And I remember I would run programs, sales training programs, and we worked in financial services coincidentally with all the large insurance companies here in Kenya. And I remember I always wondered, what is it that gives that X factor? What is it that causes someone to come for a training and absorb the insights and then go and apply them?
Correct.
and pick themselves up when it doesn't quite work and try again and look at how to implement, so that they can do better. And when I looked at the salespeople that I worked with, it was clear to me that it wasn't tenure, because there were some people who had been selling for over 10, 15 years and still getting the same mediocre kind of results.
Correct.
And yet there'd be someone who'd come in and within 12 months is building a book of business that rivals the top 10 salespeople in the team. So it wasn't the amount of time they'd been selling, right? I realized that it wasn't their intellectual ability, because they were guys who had no higher academic achievement and yet fabulous at selling. And I constantly kept asking myself, what is it? What is the differentiator? And then I read a book by Daniel Goleman.
Oh, I've read it.
And and that was it. In his book, Why, EQ Can Be More Important Than IQ, I found the secret.
Yeah.
For me, this was it. This thing called emotional intelligence actually was the differentiator. It is the reason why a salesperson can go and see a client who abuses them and can kind of dust it off and go and see the next client. It's emotional intelligence.
Wow.
It is emotional intelligence that enables you to be resilient. It's emotional intelligence that enables you to connect with your customers because of empathy. It's emotional intelligence that causes you to ask questions that help you to understand your customer better. Because you're curious.
Exactly.
Because you want to know them more. It's emotional intelligence.
So I'm thinking you took 5 years to get to the point where you're like, this is what I want, after having started the company. And the question for me is, because EQ was not a topic people discussed. And it's a thing now.
Yeah.
Like 10 years ago, no one was talking about EQ or emotional intelligence. In fact, it was not even a subject. Why do you think it's common now? Why do you think people are actually appreciating it now?
So when I started on my EQ journey, and initially when we started, how I incorporated it is in our programs. So we had our flagship sales training programs for salespeople and for sales managers, and I'd incorporate emotional intelligence. And I remember that won us a few, big pieces of business because it was different to what others were doing. And I got to the point where I realized that this module was not enough.
Okay.
Because here's the thing. Emotional intelligence isn't just another skill to add to the plate. Emotional intelligence is the plate upon which every other skill sits. And so for me, I realized, emotional intelligence is the foundation.
No way.
It is the foundation.
Because a lot of people would disagree.
It is the foundation. What skill is there that's not rooted in emotional intelligence? What skill is there that's not rooted in your ability to understand your emotions and use your emotions? The reality is emotions drive behavior. Whether you realize it or not. You could be one of those people who says, hey, no, me, I'm very rational. But I'm here to tell you, emotions drive behavior. They do. They do. They either drive behavior loudly or beneath the surface.
Yeah.
So, to your question, sorry, you asked, why is it
more important now?
Important now?
Why are people embracing it?
I think it's two things. So the pandemic, definitely. I think if you're one of those people who felt that emotions must be left at the door and emotions have no place in business and emotions are irrelevant for work, I think the pandemic has opened your eyes to realize that actually that's a lie. Emotions are an integral part of who we are. Did you know emotions are chemicals? They are chemicals that course through your body, released by the emotional part of the brain.
I think that's also another tweetable thing. Emotions are chemicals.
They are chemicals released by the emotional part of the brain. Our brain has the emotional part of the brain and the rational part of the brain. The rational part of the brain is in charge of higher order thinking and processing. And the emotional part of the brain is in charge of feeling and acting. And so what happens is the emotional part of the brain releases chemicals that cause you to feel the way that you feel.
So that's something else I'm getting. Not only is it a gift, but it's chemicals.
And so it means that you cannot remove it from yourself. It's not possible.
Thanks for saying that, Mucha, because a lot of times we do events and it can be a very emotional job. Especially when, your suppliers are not coming or when you're doing a wedding and the bride is annoyed and you're like, calm down.
Yes.
And, and the more someone tells you calm down, you feel like you're just like, no, So It's very interesting to hear you say that, and I think I read one of your profiles where you said emotion is data.
Yes.
And I think what I got from that, you were saying that it's what we do with them
Yes.
that makes the difference. So
Yes.
emotions are not necessarily bad,
Nope.
but it's what we do with them.
Yeah.
So why is it important for a business owner? Why is it important for those of us who are in events right now, who, by the way, our livelihoods have literally been stripped? Why would that be important for us now?
So emotions are data. And, I say this all the time. There are no good or bad emotions. And those emotions that those emotions that cause us to feel uncomfortable, those emotions that are not pleasant to experience, we like to label as negative. But emotions are data. They have no positive or negative to them. Remember, emotions are insight. Your emotions are a message from yourself to yourself, letting you know what the state of play is. Think of it this way. Your emotions are like the light that comes on your dashboard. That light is not good or bad. It's a light.
It's just an indicator.
It's a light that is an indicator telling you to pay attention. And when you don't pay attention, when you ignore the light, if it's a fuel light, what happens? You run out of fuel, right? And the car stops.
Correct.
And so your emotions are insight. Every emotion you feel is insight. Every emotion you feel is right in that moment. There's no wrong emotion. In the moment of feeling overwhelmed, overwhelm is a message to yourself.
Even if I'm at a table and I'm having a discussion, I'm like, but no!
So that is not the emotion. That is your response to the emotion.
Okay.
Those are two different things.
Differentiate.
Yes. So emotional intelligence is about being aware of your emotions. Understanding your emotions are insight.
Okay.
But it's also understanding that you are not a slave to your emotions. So just because I feel like banging the table, doesn't necessarily mean I must. Emotional intelligence is recognizing that desire to bang the table and asking myself, why?
And will it achieve anything?
It does. Do you know the funny thing is, the more we ignore and suppress our emotions, the more uncontrollable they become. The more we're able to gather ourselves and ask ourselves, oh, what is this emotion trying to tell me? The more we see our emotions as allies. Your emotion is your friend. It's an ally. I like to think of my emotions as friends that have come around for a cup of tea. And the more you see your emotions as an ally, the less threatening they become. The less likely they are to overwhelm you. Now, emotional intelligence isn't being a robot. Because the reality is sometimes I do need to bang the table. But here's the thing. There is a big difference between banging the table when I have paused, reflected on the impact, asked myself what it is I truly want, then made a decision to bang on the table. There's a difference between that and banging on the table without even realizing, without even thinking about the pros and cons, without even allowing yourself to consider the impact it would have on the consequences. Other person and the consequences.
Yeah.
And so emotional intelligence is paying attention to those emotions. And I think the key thing about emotional intelligence is when we pay attention, we're actually able to head off those powerful feelings. By the time I get to the point of banging the table, most likely I've not been paying attention. Most likely I've been suppressing.
Your
I have
emotions.
been ignoring.
Yes.
I have been sidestepping.
Right.
And when you suppress, ignore, sidestep your emotions, when they're quietly telling you, Mucha, things are not okay. What happens is they start getting louder. Until, Mucha, things are not okay.
So if Mucha had noticed and taken note and say, okay, something is not right, and if Mucha handled it then, she probably wouldn't have got to the point where she bangs the table.
Bingo.
So why should people be smart about their emotions? Why should business owners, people in events right now, those of us who feel like it's not worth it, or those of us who are discouraged or depressed, as you said at the beginning of your career, Why is that important? Why is EQ important?
It's important because emotions drive behavior. And so when I don't pay attention to my emotions, it's like driving blindfolded. That's just a recipe for disaster. No matter how well you know the road, driving blindfolded is just going to get you in a pickle, right? So because emotions drive behavior, I need to become mindful of my emotions. I need to get better at determining what they are, and more than that, determining why I'm feeling that way. Emotional intelligence also helps me to understand patterns that exist that are not serving me well. The brain loves autopilot. The brain does a million things. And so where possible, the brain will have you doing things the way you've always done them, your default patterns.
Correct.
But some of those patterns are not serving us well. Some of those patterns are actually doing us a disservice. And emotional intelligence is about growing that awareness. You know, I talk about self-awareness as being a superpower for those of us who are in business. Because the more I'm able to tune in with how I'm feeling, with the patterns that are existing, the more I'm able to then identify patterns that don't serve me well, the more I am able to see where my emotions are showing up in my behavior. So let me give you an example. If I am feeling frustrated, because of the lack of business that's coming through.
Because of the second lockdown.
Because of the second lockdown. And if I don't acknowledge my frustration and find ways to relieve that frustration that are positive, my frustration is going to start bleeding through. And it starts bleeding through in my conversations. So the way I speak, how I interact with others. And initially, perhaps it is just a little. But like I said, when we don't pay attention, the emotion becomes louder because I'm frustrated.
Yes.
And I'm not doing anything about that frustration. And so it's still rooted in me, right? And so it starts bleeding through in my behavior. It starts bleeding through in my conversations. And so here I am, frustrated, and an opportunity comes for an engagement. And I'm meeting a client.
Yes.
But I'm frustrated.
Yes.
And the funny thing about our emotions is that you can be multiple things at the same time. You can be emotions that are on opposite ends of the spectrum at the same time. So I'm excited because here's an opportunity for me to sell.
Yes.
And yet I'm frustrated. I've not dealt with the emotional baggage that has come as a result of this last 6 months where I've done no work. And so when the customer starts asking a few questions more than what I expected, when the customer starts giving a little pushback, when the customer starts challenging, you know, the vision that you have for their event, remember, I'm frustrated.
Yes.
So my frustration starts seeping out
into the way
that I interact with that customer, into the words that I use with that customer. The possible result, I lose the business.
Absolutely.
And I become even more frustrated. And then it becomes a vicious cycle.
So get this. Those of us, and I speak for many, who are not used to this, we're used to suppressing our emotions. We're not used to taking, as Leonard would say, have a meeting with yourself and say, okay, this is happening to me.
Yes.
What do we need? What practices or what can we do to start paying attention to these emotions? Like, I mean, I normally don't. If you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is, you know, check your emails. You know, nowhere in that calendar, most of us is, okay, reflection or, so what should we do?
So you know, there are many ways that we can develop greater emotional intelligence. When I'm interacting with individuals who feel, where do I start? Because there's so many things to do. I always say start with self-awareness. And this is my personal approach, right? Start with self-awareness. Start with including in your day a window to reflect.
I like that.
And reflection can be first thing in the morning or last thing in the evening.
Okay.
And all you need is 15 minutes. And I can assure you, to anyone who is watching right now, I can put my money where my mouth is and tell you that if you try this for the next 14 days, you will see a difference.
Is it?
15 minutes every day. And the idea of self-awareness isn't just to be aware for the sake of awareness. It's to be aware so that you can begin to put in place strategies that help you to navigate whatever it is that you're feeling. Because the goal with emotional intelligence isn't just to develop emotional insight, it's to develop emotional insight and then use those emotions as a strategic resource. Because they are.
Yeah, as you said, they're a gift.
Resource.
Yeah.
They are a gift.
Yeah.
So I would say if you don't know where to start with self-awareness. Start with reflection. 15 minutes every day.
So in this reflection, remember you're talking to those of us who are not used to that. I mean,
Yes.
I am not used to doing that. I mean, I can pray, but
Yes.
like 15 minutes
Yes.
of silence or
Yes.
whatever. What should a reflection moment, a reflection of 15 minutes look like?
Fantastic. So here's what you do. So I find reflection greatest or more effective for me in the evening because then I'm able to reflect on the day.
Okay.
So what you're trying to do is you're trying to really tune in, right? And listen out for the emotions that you have felt. And so the idea is to just go through your day and ask yourself, what moments throughout the day did I feel either very high highs or low lows? You know, what is it? And then the question is to ask yourself, what was happening at that time? Why? What could be the trigger? Right? What could be the trigger? So the idea is to just reflect on your day and ask yourself, how did I do today? A question that I like to ask is, consider when your best self showed up and ask yourself why.
Okay.
What was happening? What caused it?
Yeah.
And then consider when your worst self showed up.
So did you hear that? Consider when your best self showed up and what happened, and then consider when your worst self showed up and what happened.
And
would
why?
it help to write it down or, you know?
So that then depends on an individual. So I am a journaling person. I express myself best through written word, right? That just comes naturally for me.
Yeah.
Even my prayer walk is written.
Oh,
I
nice.
pray in writing,
No
right?
way. Okay.
That's how I express myself best. But it's personal. So you can just reflect in your thoughts. When your mind runs away, bring it back and ask yourself. And really it's just focusing on, when was I my best self? What caused me to be my best self? And it's amazing the insights you'll gain. So you learn, for example, that I'm my best self when I've had enough sleep.
Like what happened? It's like me asking myself, I made noise at Esther the other day. Why?
And when you're looking at best self, worst self, it's good to look at it in the context of a challenge that may have happened. So something comes up and I was able to be my best self when I dealt with it. So why is it? What caused me in that instant to be my best self? And then likewise, a challenge comes up. A client is late or a supplier is late.
Yes.
What caused me to show up as my worst self?
Yeah.
Right? What is it? And you begin to pick patterns. I want to give you an example that maybe, it's not a work example, but I hope it can illustrate this point.
Okay.
When I started the work of reflecting and thinking through my day, I realized that after a certain time in the day, the likelihood of clashes and intense moments of fellowship with my children
Was
increased exponentially. Right?
Yes.
So as I reflect, I'm looking and thinking, okay, this is a sign. When I am tired after being at work, after, giving of myself, which is what I do for a living, I'm exhausted when I come home. And so I realized that my children having a strict bedtime wasn't just for their benefit, it was for mine too.
Nice. Okay.
I needed them to go to bed at a certain time because when they didn't, it was more likely that we were just going to clash and have issues, which then, has an impact on our relationship.
Wow.
So when you start picking up on those patterns, you're able to realize that, okay, I now need to take this step or I need to take that step so that I can use this emotional insight to make optimum decisions. Because that's what it's all about. Using the emotional insight to then make choices. And you cannot use what you don't know.
So that's where the reflection comes in. I remember Les Brown saying that he told his staff, never come to me with a problem first thing in the morning. Come to me between 10 a.m. and 12 noon. Why? Because I don't want to wake up in the morning and you just one problem after the other, one problem after the other. Yeah. So he's like, if you have any bad news or anything that needs, like major attention, 10 to 12.
Yeah. And you see, you can only do that when you have, developed, a way of picking up. Remember, your emotions are an ally. They're an asset. They are a strategic resource. And as a person in business, where business is so, where business can give us such highs and lows.
Yes.
It's even more important for us to be in tune with what we're feeling. Because here's the thing, if you don't process what you're feeling, if you don't utilize it, if you don't pay attention to it, it bleeds out. And it shows up as emotional toxicity somewhere else.
Yeah.
Either in the way you speak to your staff, right? Or in the way you deal with your suppliers. Or, God forbid, in the way that you interact with your customers when they begin to push your buttons.
Wow.
And so this soft skill is extremely important. And when you look at all the research, there is eons of evidence that shows that it actually has and drives bottom line results.
Do you know, the more you talk, the more I realize it's actually very important. It's just that I've read a lot of books that say reflect, take 15 minutes. There was even a book, I can't remember what it's called, but it talks about being silent and nothing. But I don't think I've ever heard anyone explain it the way you have just done. Because when I shout at my suppliers, if I was to take the challenge that you've just set for me, because I'm going to take it, have 15 minutes every day where you reflect on the day and ask yourself about when was I my best self and when was I my worst self. If I do that for 14 days, then for sure I'll be able to pick up on data that will help me to figure out, okay, for me not to feel this way, as you're saying with your kids, I need to make sure that I do X and not Y.
Yeah. And the more you understand yourself, the better the relationships you'll have.
Yeah.
The better the relationships you have. So I am low on emotional empathy, as a default. So my default tendency is that I am low on emotional empathy. So what that means is I am the kind of individual who's very driven and driven by results. And so I can come into a meeting with my team, and miss out on emotional cues that tell me that the team is not in a good space, right?
I used to call that, are you emotionally deaf? Tone deaf?
Yes. So my default is a tendency to miss out on emotional data.
Okay.
And here's the thing. There's the beauty of emotional intelligence is there's no good or bad. We need people who are different. We need different skill sets, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
So an individual like myself, in the assessment we do an assessment called a brain profile. In my brain profile is I am a deliverer. Deliverers are very goal-oriented. They are very results-driven. And they push themselves to very high, sometimes unrealistic standards. But the downfall is that as much as deliverers can achieve results, sometimes it's at the cost of people because they miss out on emotional data. Now, it's not that it is a, how can I say this? So knowing this, having this insight, helps me to practice emotional intelligence by checking in with myself and asking myself, okay, maybe I need to take a break here. Maybe I need to stop and I need to check in with the team. I need to take the emotional temperature to understand where people are. Because here's the thing, you cannot drive people if they are not on board.
That is
emotionally.
true. Okay.
Not just physically.
Okay.
Emotions drive behavior, whether it is in life or at work. And so even your team need to be on board emotionally for you to be able to achieve your goals sustainably.
Okay. So someone is asking, so for example, millennial CEO KE is asking, so fear is an emotion.
Yes, it is.
Is it bad?
There are no bad emotions.
Okay.
So fear is telling you that something that is important to you is potentially at loss.
Okay.
Fear is telling you, it's just giving you that insight that there is something important to you that you could potentially lose.
Okay.
Something important to you that you need to pay attention to. So the idea is to have a meeting with yourself and get to the bottom of why you are feeling that fear. I'll give you an example. So about a month ago, and I remember I shared this in my podcast. I have a podcast, EQ at Work, and I shared this in my podcast. About a month ago, we're now beginning of this month, I realized I had a Monday, where I had just had no energy, right? And I try to be in tune with how I'm feeling. So I recognized it and I told myself, okay, let's have a pajama day. Let's just bum around doing nothing today.
Okay.
Perhaps I'm just fatigued.
Okay.
But by Tuesday, I still was feeling, like
The same way.
feeling the same way. And so I thought to myself that, okay, this is not just about feeling tired, even emotionally. There's something more here.
Okay.
So I had a meeting with myself. And when I stopped to reflect on why I was feeling that way, and part of emotional intelligence is being vulnerable with yourself, being real with yourself,
Which a lot of us
struggle to do, and seeing yourself as you really are. And as I had this meeting with myself and really just started to peel back the layers to understand what I was feeling, one of the loudest emotions was fear, right? So one of the loudest emotions, I realized I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling afraid as we've gone into a new quarter. As I began to peel back the layers, I realized that we had a really awesome first quarter. And at the end of the quarter, we were well on our way to achieving our goals for 2021.
Oh, good stuff.
Yes.
So
As in the first quarter.
In the first
right?
quarter,
So if we
yeah.
replicated that for each quarter,
You'd
we
be
will
good.
hit our targets. And there was this little voice in my head that said it was a fluke.
Huh.
And that there was no way that we were going to be able to replicate it. And so it manifests itself as fear. But when I started paying attention to the emotion and asking myself, why am I feeling this? And digging deeper, I realized why I was feeling that way. And here's the thing. If you don't pay attention, there's consequences.
Correct.
Let me explain. So because of this fear that I was feeling, that there is no way we can have another good Q2, because this little voice in my head is saying, it was a fluke. It cannot be replicated.
You did not do
I
any
mean, at the end of the
strategies.
we are in COVID times.
Yes.
It would be understandable that we can't. Can you hear how I'm already beginning to set myself up for a
failure.
bad quarter?
Yeah, for failure almost.
Because I'm listening to this voice, I'm not doing the things that I did in the first quarter to generate the results that I did. Things like showing up on social media consistently. Things like calling clients religiously. Things like sending out proposals without fail. Because at the beginning of the year, I had a conversation with my business coach, and we talked about how we set ourselves up for failure when we set goals, because we focus on things that are beyond our control. And so we set targets that I can control. So what are those targets? X number of clients in my diary every single week. X number of individuals that I engage with on social media one-to-one. X number of posts. X number of events. See, those are things I can control.
Yes.
And if I do those religiously, they will generate this result that I'm trying to achieve. So fast forward, beginning of Q2, my emotions have me in a twist, and I'm no longer doing those things that generated the
Q1 results.
And so if I stop doing those things, am I going to get good results in Q2?
No.
Of course not. And so I realized in that moment of reflection that, okay, thank you, fear. I hear you. It's true that I may not generate the results that I would like to.
Correct.
But it's not going to be because I didn't do my part.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. You
So,
did what was in your control.
I am going to focus on what I can control. And I think for me, that fear was a call to action. If I hadn't paid attention to it, I would still be stuck in that rut of feeling like, and not doing my part. And lo and behold, Q2 will finish, and I'm nowhere.
You know
as
what
far
I'm
as my
getting?
results are
You know what
concerned.
I'm getting? Emotion. I mean, fear is an emotion. And I can actually dare say fear is a gift, because it pushed you to action.
Yes.
So I would tell emotional CEO KE that use your fear to direct you and to create strategies to help you overcome whatever it is
That
you're afraid of.
Yeah. And it starts with being honest with yourself. It starts with being honest. I mean, it wasn't easy for me to be honest and admit to myself that I'm afraid of failing, that I'm afraid that I cannot continue on this trajectory that I am on.
Okay.
Right? So it starts, and this is why reflection is important, because you're able to reflect and pick up on where your emotions are potentially holding you hostage. Your emotions are meant to be a strategic resource. They're meant to be a resource, something you use to then push you forward. And your emotions will either push you in the direction that you want to go or hold you back. And this is why you find that you have this backwards and forwards, because you're not paying attention to how you're feeling. You're just pushing through, because we've been told, just push through, just keep going, just take another step.
Ignore.
Just ignore. Vumilia. So the challenge is you're moving forward and then your emotions are taking you back. And you're moving forward and your emotions are taking you back. Hey,
You feel
how
like you're
tiring is that?
I actually told someone it's like you're on an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
I am so going to reflect. Is there maybe other things that we can do in our day-to-day to improve our emotional intelligence? For sure, I'm taking that moment of reflection. Is there anything else that you would suggest today?
So, I mean, when you're feeling like, where do I start? Reflection is great as a once a day kind of thing. But we can I also encourage people to actually have check-ins throughout the day.
Okay.
So a check-in throughout the day isn't so much about reflecting on, what worked, what didn't work. It's just checking in with yourself. How am I doing?
Okay.
Right now in this moment, right? Where am I right now in this moment? So I'm part of a global network called 6 Seconds. 6 Seconds is the largest emotional intelligence network, and my company, PTS Africa, is the preferred partner in this region for 6 Seconds. And one of the tools that we use at 6 Seconds is called a body, mind, and heart check. So the idea is, remember, emotions are chemicals that course through your body, and they are triggered as a result of the interplay between your thoughts and the rational part of your brain and the emotional part of your brain. And so your thoughts, your feelings, your actions are very much intertwined. So the body, mind, and heart check-in is just checking in with those three. Checking with your body, asking yourself, what am I feeling physically? Sometimes pain that is manifested physically is as a result of emotions, right? Mm-hmm. So that tension, headache could be emotional driven. So it's checking in with yourself. How am I doing emotional? If I start with the top of my head and I just go down every part of my body, where is there some tension? Is it in my shoulders? Is it, in my back? Am I feeling it? Where is there any tension?
Yeah.
Right? What can I do to release that tension? So that's body. Mind. What are my thoughts? Mm-hmm. How am I thinking? Are my thoughts here, there, everywhere? Am I thinking erratically? Or am I in a state of, calm reflection? And what can I do about it? And then heart. What are my emotions? How am I feeling in this moment? Am I able to pick up on
Correct.
my emotions? How are my emotions showing up in my behavior? So the idea of checking in with yourself is kind of centering yourself, right? It's centering yourself, and it allows you to then dispense with any negative energy that may be there. The other thing is, so it's really important that we find ways, or that we know ways that help us to bring ourselves into balance. So when I'm out of balance, what is it that I can do that brings me back into balance? Right? And for each of us, it's different things. There are those who will tell you that when I'm really stressed, when my emotions are feeling as though, if I go for a run, I come back and I'm centered.
Yeah,
right?
I know such people, yes.
Yeah. There's someone who will tell you that for me, I just put on some music, blast it loud, and dance along. And that for me, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So again, self-awareness is important. Understanding what is it that brings you back into balance. I heard someone use an analogy of a bank account and, emotional bank account. And here's the thing. If you are in debit, if your account is overdrawn consistently, it will be harder for you to show up as your best self when people push your buttons. Think about it.
Nice.
Think about it. If you are overdrawn emotionally, when that supplier is late, when that employee is not doing it the way you wanted it done, when that client is pushing back, it's harder for you to pause and respond appropriately. But when you are in the black emotionally, those things just fly off. They really do. Do you know what I mean? Your supplier calls you and tells you that, there's traffic, as if we didn't know traffic exists. Do you know what I mean? Those things that can drive you up the wall. But when you are in a good space emotionally, do you know those things don't trouble you like they do?
You'll actually be able to respond to them better.
You will.
Yeah.
You will.
There's a question here I have to ask. Someone is asking, how does one deal with emotional baggage?
So the reality is that it's about actually taking the time to get a deeper understanding of who you are, understanding of what your identity is, understanding of what has shaped you into the person that you are. So we're now, I think, in week 6. So 6 weeks ago, we launched the 40-week EQ challenge. And it's interesting that this individual has asked this question now, because this week, the activity we're doing is a life timeline. So the idea is to take some time away from everything else, get a piece of paper and a pen and potentially some crayons or coloring pencils if you're someone who's artistic, and just think back over your life and map the different milestones, the different events that triggered your emotions, either positively or negatively. Right? So it's a very simple exercise that sounds too simple. But the idea is you're looking back and thinking about all those times that you can remember where, those are things that you can almost feel like you're back in that moment.
Yes, yes.
And so the idea of this timeline is you start to see along this path called your life, the moments where there may have been trauma that is still showing up in your life today. When we don't deal with emotional baggage, it's like you are walking around with a backpack full of rocks.
And it gets heavy.
And after a while, you cannot even move, right? So this timeline, map it down. So from when you were born, I remember when I first did this exercise as part of a 6 seconds certification, I drew a river. I'm not very artistic, but I drew a river. And at the beginning of the river was my birth, and I remember I drew some balloons and some fireworks, It's like,
absolutely. Yay, you're coming to the world.
I'm coming to the world. And I just really reflected. I reflected on the different times in my life where my life either moved in a certain way or was impacted in some way as a result of what had happened. And once you're done, the idea is to now go back and look at each of these moments and ask yourself, how is this moment showing up today? How is this moment showing up today? And once you start unpacking how this moment is showing up today, then you can start asking yourself what you can do about it.
Okay.
Yeah, you can start asking yourself what you can do about it.
So it's still, in some form, still reflecting.
It is.
It's still reflecting.
There is power in
reflection.
There is power.
I'm getting
it's
that.
Still reflecting. So the idea is to then ask yourself, what can I learn from that? How can I let it go? Do I need to forgive myself? Do I need to forgive other people? So that I'm no longer held hostage by that experience. A lot of who we are today is shaped by the experiences we've gone through.
Yes.
If you think of an analogy of an iceberg, what is on the surface is what is visible, how we act, how we respond, but what is beneath the surface is what determines what is above the surface. So really dealing with emotional baggage requires going beneath the surface. And it's messy, it is uncomfortable, and it is unpleasant.
I guess you have to be willing to do
that
work.
You have to be willing to do that work so that you can see progress. Yeah.
Helen Jerry is asking, she's saying, I love this topic. What would you say about procrastination?
So again, and this is, I laugh because this is my Achilles heel, procrastination. And I came to the realization that procrastination is not a time management issue. It is an emotional issue.
No way.
It is. This is why I say there is nothing that is not embedded in emotional intelligence.
You see, now is when I'm beginning to realize that
There is
emotional
nothing.
intelligence is the plate.
We approach procrastination as though it is something that is about time management. Yes, it's true that, time management can help us, but the reality is procrastination at its core is an emotional issue. And so again, the question to ask yourself is, why are you procrastinating? What is it that is causing you not to get done the things that you wish to get done? And until you can get to the root of that, you can have all the systems and processes in the world.
Asana,
Google, you can have all of them, they
Slack,
will make no difference.
Nothing.
And I laugh because procrastination is my Achilles heel. And I have realized that I procrastinate whenever I feel that the task is something that I cannot do. So there's this thing called imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is the idea that you really are an imposter, that somehow, for however long, you've managed to fool everyone that you know what you're doing, but really and truly you have no clue, right? Really and truly, at some moment, they're going to catch you out.
Yeah.
And they're going to expose you as a fake.
Yes.
So this is imposter syndrome. And it is said that women especially suffer from this. And so I realize that my procrastination is really built around my feeling that I am an imposter. And so whenever I have a task, I'll give you an example. I have a client who called me this morning. We're doing a session tomorrow morning. And he says to me that, Mucha, just wanted to check in that we're on point for tomorrow. Our session at 8 o'clock. It's online. I was like, yeah, we're on point. And he's like, and I wanted to say to you that this is like my leadership team. These are the people. These are the ones who will decide whether or not we are going to continue with our program, right?
No pressure.
Because the idea is we have a program we're rolling out throughout the year. These are the decision makers. These are the guys who are going to say, yes, we want more of Mucha, or please get rid of this person.
Yes.
And, so we had our conversation. I told him we are fine, we are on track, all is well. And so I ended that call and just started reflecting, had one of these check-ins. And I realized that when I have gigs like that, I start to doubt myself. I start to think, can I really
deliver?
Do I really know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
What do I know? I don't have a doctorate in this thing.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness. And so I begin to procrastinate. I begin to put off
what you should be doing.
What I should be doing, because I feel like, oh my goodness, I can't do this.
You know what? Hold that thought. Guys, I know it's 3 p.m. We're done with an hour. So I'm going to ask for 10 extra minutes because there are 2 questions here that we must ask. And before we let Mucha go, we can't finish everything in the hour, but at least you will know a bit about emotional intelligence. Mucha, women, you said women. You brought out the word women, and someone asked, can women really achieve emotional intelligence?
Yes. Emotional intelligence is a skill. It's a skill. And
you can learn.
This is why I am so excited about this thing. Because all the research says that individuals who are high in emotional intelligence are more successful. They are more effective. They have better and stronger relationships. They are have greater quality of life. They are they're able to find balance and create well-being. And this thing called emotional intelligence, it's a skill, it's not a trait. That's what's exciting. So it's not that you are born with it or without it. No.
You can actually learn.
It is a skill.
That you can learn.
It is a skill. And this is why I say self-awareness is a superpower, because it's only when you become aware of yourself that you recognize that here are the areas where I'm not doing so well, and here are the areas where I am stronger. And in EQ coaching, we talk about leading with your strengths. So that means, how can I leverage my strengths to support me in the areas that I am not so great?
Yeah.
So my answer is yes. Anyone,
Absolutely.
no matter what age, no matter what gender, can develop emotional intelligence because it's a skill.
Last question, second last question. Please touch on emotions in the workplace.
All right, so I'm not sure what.
Yeah, she
that
was saying,
means.
I love it. I'm learning all emotions are speaking to me about a situation I'm going through. Mine is to listen and discuss.
Yes.
She says, discuss with them.
Myself. Discuss with them. I like that. Yes, I like that.
And she's like, could Mucha touch on emotions in the workplace? I'm not too sure in what way.
So here's the thing. So I disabuse that notion that we can leave our emotions at the door when we go to work. That is not possible, because our emotions are an integral part of who we are. So you cannot separate yourself from your emotions. However, let me put in this, and I'm glad this has come up because I'm able to qualify that. It doesn't mean then that you're a slave to your emotions, that you can act anyhow. Just because you're in a bad mood just doesn't mean that you must be dismissive with people in the office.
Correct.
So when we think of our emotions in the workplace, it's me being able to check in with myself, understand how I'm feeling, and ensure that that doesn't bleed out in the way I interact with others. Now, it doesn't mean that every day at work I must be, this happy person and, be very positive all the time. I mean, hey, life is tough.
Yeah, and
there
that's
are
the reality.
days where we're not having good days. But emotional intelligence is about understanding that, okay, today is one of those days where I'm not necessarily in a good space. So what can I do about it? How can I ensure that it doesn't then create, or it doesn't then cause me to have falling out with everyone in the office? How do I make sure that I pick up on this insight and find ways to get to the bottom of how I'm feeling. But emotional intelligence isn't a quick fix. It doesn't mean, because I'm feeling low, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling at pain because I've lost a loved one, that I'm just going to switch it off and snap out of it. No, right? But when I am mindful that this is how I'm feeling, I can then now think through, how do I want to show up at work? So I would say emotions in the workplace is about being intentional. Okay. It's about responding rather than reacting.
I like that
yes.
notion.
It's about responding rather than reacting. So there's that colleague who pushes your button. It's about taking a breath and then responding.
Yeah.
Rather than just the verbal diarrhea that can come. There are those people who blast through life and their argument is, I'm just saying it how it is. Yeah, well, that's really going to have an impact on your relationships, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, oh, wow. Questions are coming in. So I'm just going to say we're going to leave Mucha's contacts in the comments, and I'm sure she'll go there and answer the questions that you might have.
Sure.
And I just have to say, before we let you go, is what resources can we use? Are there other EQ coaches? How do we go about, can we contact you, or do you normally deal with organizations? And if that's the case, then are there books? What resources can we use?
So there's so much we can do. And let me start backwards from what is out there in general, and I'll close with what we're able to do. So, you can go online. There are so many online platforms now with online learning that is available for free. Emotional intelligence is a topic that is very readily available. So you can find, whether it's through things like LinkedIn Learning, whether it is, just going on YouTube and watching YouTube videos. There's a lot that is available out there. All right, that's the first thing I would say if someone is interested in emotional intelligence.
Good.
But if I look more specifically on what we do, so we work with individuals, we work with teams, and we work with organizations.
Okay.
And we have a number of free resources that are available to those in our community. Because I am passionate about this thing called EQ. I call myself an EQ fanatic. And, my goal is to transform our continent.
Awesome.
That is my goal. So we have a lot of free resources. So I'll mention some. I have a podcast called the EQ at Work podcast, and that is available on all the different podcast platforms. And on a fortnightly basis, I talk about matters emotional intelligence, and it's specifically targeted towards professionals. So people looking to develop this skill for their benefit at work. So that's the EQ at Work podcast that you can find. So every fortnight, I have something that I share. Secondly, we're in our 40-week EQ challenge. So if you actually just go online to our website, www.pts.co.ke/EQ challenge, you're able to join. It's free. 40 weeks, every week on Monday morning in our Facebook group, I go live and I share the challenge for the week and the tools that you need to be able to do the challenge. And every Friday we reflect on how the challenge has gone. And it has been a phenomenal experience. And those who are in our Facebook group, I'm sure will comment and say how they've really benefited from the challenge. That's the second thing. The third thing, again, free resources. Every month we have an EQ Lunch and Learn. So our next EQ Lunch and Learn is next week on Wednesday, and it is the last Wednesday of every month from 12:30 to 2 p.m. East Africa time. And I host a panel discussion with individuals, and we're talking EQ. We're talking about all the things that are important to you as a professional. Our topic next month is actually the power of empathy, and I'm really looking forward to a conversation with my panelists about whether, being empathetic makes you soft. And, whether, as people at work, we should be empathetic or should we be hard-nosed? So I think that would be a great conversation. Yeah. So those are 3 tools, 3 things that you can kind of grab hold of right now that are 100% free. And then over and above that, we have programs and coaching. We have our Unlock Potential with EQ, which is coming up the first week of May. So that is a program that you pay for. It is 3 sessions on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday evening from 5 to 7 p.m. And this is now where we begin the work of digging deeper. to understand emotional intelligence and why the World Economic Forum says it is one of the top 10 skills for success in this fourth industrial revolution. If you want to learn more about the program, again, our website, www.pts.co.ke/UPEQ. And then you'll get all the information about that program. And I am online. So yes, I will go on the YouTube channel. I will answer the questions that you have left there. You can engage with me. My social media handle is @Mucha Mlingo everywhere. Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. So very easy to find me @Mucha Mlingo. More than happy to answer any questions. And actually, before I forget, tomorrow, 1 p.m. East Africa time, I will be live on Instagram with an EQ Q&A. So any EQ questions you have, you can join me online tomorrow. So
all right.
Lots of stuff that people can get engaged with.
I was just about to say Millennial CEO KE. You heard that? Because she has so many questions. Like, make sure you tune in at 1 p.m. tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay? And do that. Thank you so much, Mucha. Your parting shot.
My parting shot. Emotional intelligence, I believe, is a game changer. It will be the difference between your success or failure in business. Mark my words. And the exciting thing about this skill is it is learnable. Everyone can learn to develop greater emotional intelligence. As I mentioned earlier, emotional intelligence isn't just another skill that you as an entrepreneur, you as a business person, you as a professional needs to add to your arsenal. Emotional intelligence is the plate upon which every other skill resides. People who are high in emotional intelligence are more successful, period. And so if you haven't already begun, get on your own personal EQ journey. You will not regret it, I promise you.
Amen. That's all I can say. So what? Thank you so much for joining us today, Mucha. The information you've given us has been very, very helpful. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back next week with, shall I say, maybe I shall not. We'll put out a poster, but we want to go deeper into our mental health and anything that would affect our mental well-being. And so today I'd like to really thank Aquatronic Studio for allowing us to shoot today. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. You're doing an awesome job. If you want to hold an interview, if you want to have your Zoom meetings and you want to have a conference, a hybrid event, please call Aquatronic Studios, call Sanjeev. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. And thank you. God bless.